Looking ahead, challenges and opportunities in the changing world. Welcome to Talking Economics, podcast launched on the occasion of the 30th anniversary of the Center for Economic Research and Graduate Education, Economics Institute. Have you learned anything new about our educational system due to the pandemic? And why is economics of education becoming more important these days? My name is Katarína Stehlíková, and with my guest today, we will have a closer look at the economics of education. Let me welcome Daniel Münich, a CERGE-EI Ph.D. in economics alumnus and a member of CERGE-EI Faculty. Daniel has served as the executive director of the academic think tank IDEA at CERGE-EI since 2012. Among other consulting and advisory activities, he served as an advisor to the Ministry of Education, Youth and Sports of the Czech Republic and was a member of an expert team that worked on preparing reforms of the Czech tertiary education system. He also serves as a senior expert to the EU Commission in the European Expert Network of Economists of Education. In 2020, he joined the Economic Advisory Board of the National Crisis Committee, whose main task was to recommend measures to mitigate the economic impact of the coronavirus pandemic on the country. He has published several publications and case studies on the Czech educational system. Welcome, Daniel.
Hello.
Well, with you, we want to discuss the economics of education. And the first question is, I don't think the question is if has the pandemic affected it, but how?
I can speak about myself and our institution, and especially IDEA think tank at CERGE-EI. In the very early stage of the pandemics last year, early spring, we started producing a number of highly policy-oriented studies utilizing our general knowledge of economics, but none of them could be labeled economics of education, simply because the whole focus of the society was on other issues than that, how to freeze the economy and how to help firms surviving and these things, the testing statistics, all these. But over time, as the Czech school system has been closed, people started feeling that it's something unusual, something totally new, that it requires some insight. So we started working on it. So in the later stage, in the fall, and especially this spring, we published a couple of studies on which could be labeled economics of education, which in principle tried to explain policymakers and general public what are the invisible costs of school closures, that these costs are really huge, much bigger than most people thought, and that school closure shouldn't be used as a cheap tool to slow down the pandemics.
Mm-hmm. So speaking about the challenges for the economics of education, what would you say are the three biggest ones?
Well, my feeling is very subjective, of course, and these challenges are not closely related to pandemics. I think they survived pandemics. So if I go from the macro level, I think it's still the big issue of how skills and education are related to economic and societal growth. There were numerous studies in the past finding causal links, how big they are and what is important and what is not. But still, a great deal of these studies were based on the past data. The data are becoming better and better, time series longer and longer. That's great. But in the same time, there are many changes ongoing in the structure of economies, how it works. So, and a lot of public money is in stake. Education is costly, and plus there are huge opportunity costs of studying, right? So there are still big issues, how important is education, how much should we invest, governments, individuals, and so on. So this is issue number one, which I find important. The second is the role of teachers. I can talk in more detail about that. Largely neglected in economics of education and overall. And the third, generally, important issue is the changing demand for skills and changing role of skills. And there is one additional topic which applies especially for countries like Czech Republic or former communist countries, and it is the lack of using empirical research to foster educational or skills-related policies, and huge skepticism about the possibility of science to help in designing more efficient and better policies.
And you think that pandemic has had no impact on these fields? Because from my perspective, I would say already the first point that you mentioned, skills and education and their role to growth, isn't this something that you used actually for estimating the impact of the years lost? Isn't there the connection? And didn't the pandemic present a natural experiment which actually could have presented new data for these sort of studies?
It's a very good guess, but the problem is that we will be able to observe the impact of the pandemics on labor market outcomes of current pupils and students, well, in 2 or 3 decades. So we have to be patient. And in the meantime, we can focus on actual skills, the loss of skills. And here we have couple of studies from the US, from the Netherlands, from Belgium, maybe from UK, but not so many. Each focusing on particular group of pupils or students. It's largely depending on data availability, comparing before and after. For instance, Czech Republic doesn't know anything about its impact, so it's fostering the feeling that nothing happened here in the country. So definitely this is a big issue, but it will take quite long time, several decades, to identify the impact on labor market and living of these people. Of course, we have some past historical experience. Of course, not the kind of pandemics, but there were several other events which the research suggests that there is real impact, that in long life cycle profiles of people, we can really identify percentage decrease in average salaries or higher mortality and things like that. So that's it.
For example, the role of teachers, didn't it become more visible through the pandemic as the parents actually stayed at home and had an opportunity to observe what the kids were doing in school? Didn't they change their perspective?
Surely, they changed the perspective. My children are already adult, so I don't have my own experience, but I can easily imagine the very unique situation when there is a teacher, children, pupils on a screen, and behind the shoulders of the people is a parent standing, watching what's going on in the class. So it might be frustrating for both sides, for teacher and for the parent. I'm not sure about the children. So it, as usual, brings it has its pros and cons. Some parents became disturbing, trying to affect what's going on in the class. In the same time, it provided feedback to parents on what's really going on in the class, the amount of information and knowledge imposed on children. Mm-hmm. So it might help changing societal mind, because it's another topic I mentioned a little bit, that the need for changing curriculum and teaching methods. Mm-hmm. Because, for instance, Czech society, but it probably applies overall, is very conservative. Most parents think that the kind of school they remember from their young ages is the right type of school for now and for the future, partly because usually successful parents are interested in that. And they probably make some link between the school of their time with their success in life.
So do you see topics that are becoming more important due to the pandemic?
So I think the pandemics and school closures opened totally new topic research, and it's distant learning and the teaching methods. Something which we couldn't speak about before the pandemics. I mean, distant learning at primary schools became daily standard. Not for everybody. It has to be said that not every teacher, every school, and not every pupil and parents were connected. Some of them stayed in some hybrid mode of receiving papers in envelopes. And the question which emerged is, to what extent this is positive movement, simply to what extent this new technology can be used even after the pandemics. For instance, for children who are lagging behind, or for children who are sick and can't attend school, which might help a lot. But in the same time, and it's commonly shared opinion, is that distant learning can hardly replace the present teaching at the primary level of schooling. And as we go further up through the educational system, we can imagine greater and greater role of distant learning. And at universities, we are at a university now, Charles University, definitely I think it had many positive impacts on these very conservative teaching methods. Everybody sitting in a class, and including the teacher, almost no distant learning. So hopefully these old-fashioned universities will learn from this.
And do you see it also as a research topic? Is this something that, researchers are actually following, and are there any data being collected so that it can be analyzed further on?
We are staying in the area of economics of education, focusing on schools, children, skills formation, and these things. There are huge differences across countries. There was some research of descriptory type in the Czech Republic, not publicly supported. I think public institutions stayed very passive. So there were some partial efforts, frequently supported by NGOs or private companies, to collect at least some data. But a great deal of the outputs is of descriptory type, simply what has happened. Mm-hmm. It's not much about finding efficiency or finding causal links. So I doubt that in the future, when the pandemic hopefully is over, we could track back the causal impact on skills and these things. But in other countries, and we still have to distinguish, there will be, I'm sure, many studies in Netherlands, in UK, in Scandinavia, but probably not so many studies in say Spain, Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Czech Republic, Slovakia, Poland will probably be those who will not learn much, because research on education, and not only economics of education, it's the area of psychology or sociology, is rather weak.
So you see nothing happening in the Czech Republic. There is no initiative from the ministry or any research institute to actually say, okay, this is a unique opportunity, this is a natural experiment we haven't had. Let's collect the data and use it to actually learn something. I
wouldn't use the term no, there is nothing. There were some attempts, even by the Czech school inspection, to collect data. But as I said, these were data collected rather quickly to foster our knowledge of what's going on. Simply, are pupils connected? Are teachers using online methods? How teachers and school principals perceive that? A great deal of the data collection focus on school principals, which is a setback because it's still too far from the cabinet of the school principal to the classroom, and especially to the head of the pupils and parents. So there was something, but from the perspective of researchers, these are not rich data. Simply, we can hardly use them in the future to make some breakthrough research findings.
And so do you see any opportunities that the economics of education can actually, are there opportunities for this field to address the challenges of the world that is changing in front of our eyes?
Well, I wouldn't speak about the world. I would stay in Czech Republic or in the Central Europe. And
which
here,
is also changing, right?
Yeah, I am convinced that science, in the behavioral sciences, economics, but psychology and sociology and so on, has a great opportunity to better inform policymaking, to improve and foster educational process of any kind, not only schools and so on, that it's not, that currently, even during and at the end of the pandemics, the scientific approaches are rarely used. But unfortunately, I don't see good prospect that this will improve substantially, because if I look at the national reconstruction plan, the Czech Republic, little attention is paid to this. Great deal of the attention is paid to no other areas than social sciences. This goes to medicine, to natural sciences, and to building some buildings and machines, but it's not primarily addressing the lack of economics of education, as there is little attention to, for instance, economics of health. And we found, and I repeatedly say it, we can buy vaccine from abroad. We don't have to develop it. We don't have to have any clue about how it's being developed, despite that Czech institutes of Academy of Sciences and Charles University and others are quite good in these areas. But Czech Republic cannot invent its own vaccine. But we have to implement our own educational policies, including anti-epidemiology processes in schools, or we have to manage economics of health to somehow survive pandemics with reasonable costs. And we cannot buy this know-how. Simply, we have to build it here in the country, including the research. So this is the barrier, in fact, I see in further progress of the countries like Czech Republic.
This is really sad what you're saying. I was hoping that the pandemic has actually opened the eyes of the policymakers, and I thought that there was more cooperation between the government and their institutes, and, for example, IDEA, and that your research actually has reached them. So you're saying that the communication was rather limited?
So there was a lot of endeavor, enthusiasm, and collaboration from the bottom. So we as economists collaborated with other areas, not only social sciences, but with math and physics faculty, people in medicine, and so on. But I didn't notice any serious attempt to support and coordinate it from above. And I didn't see any substantial change in the general understanding at the level of government that something is missing here, meaning economics of education or economics of health, unfortunately. So you can stay optimistic. Okay, it's better than nothing, but things didn't change substantially.
Not even after 18 months. So we need another wave of COVID to maybe open our eyes.
I'm not sure whether another wave of COVID would be sufficient.
We need to we need to end on a positive note. So do you see any positive impact, actually, that COVID has brought to the field of education?
Well, you mean the field in schools or
yes, in schools?
In schools,
anywhere, because it seems.
Well, it easily changed very conservative mind of teachers, that they have to open the computer, run some program for distant teaching, and starting thinking about how to do it, how to teach using this method.
It's a great change, right?
It was a great change. It's really not easy to change mind of 50 years old teachers, and we have very high average age of teachers, to change their mind after 30 years of teaching. And in many cases it worked. I'm sure many of them are enjoying it. They learned a lot, but at the same time, not everybody. And in many cases it failed. Maybe partly due to the lack of hardware, software, or lack of teachers having capacities to learn new skills, and also failed due to not having hardware, software on the other side, I mean pupils and parents and so on. So the big new phenomena which emerged is inequality in access to good education, which was problem already before the COVID arrived. So it's still kind of feeling. We don't have much data, but I'm convinced, given what I know, that the inequality in education and in resulting skills will increase during the COVID substantially. That's a big issue even for us researchers.
Mm-hmm. And as you're saying, there is no research yet or in this area. Is there at least some data collection? No.
There is some evidence from abroad, but each evidence in education is very country specific. So despite that we know something from Belgium, from Netherlands, we cannot easily say this is the same here in Czech Republic, in Poland, in Hungary. So we should have our own empirical evidence, and we don't have it. The problem also is that great deal of the data collection here was on the side of teachers and primary school principals, not getting directly to the children. So in fact, there will be a large proportion of children who are somehow hidden in the dark. Nobody asks them, nobody knows about them. And this is the big issue, to somehow approach them, find them. Many NGOs do that, providing tutoring and hardware, software, making them connected. Because schools which do not work well do not report well that they are failing. And parents who don't care much about education of their children and didn't care much even before are not telling us that it doesn't work. So it's very difficult to find out this hidden matter in the universe.
But these NGOs that are being active in this area, they probably want to analyze the impact of their work, right? So they're collecting the data and will need some, or will do some analysis.
Well, I am in close contact with them. The usual problem is that they are able to assess rather small share of the market, if I say it this way, and it's highly selective depending on their focus, where they have their people allocated in the country. So it's and they are not collecting data primarily for the purpose of research. They are focusing primarily on management of this in the field. They are collecting a lot of qualitative experience on what is missing, what's the real problem at these families, at these children, what should be done, and what could or should be done at the national level, I mean, provided by the municipalities or the government. So at this moment, information is this soft information, qualitative information, is being collected. And the plan is that people in need, which was the major organization, humanitarian organization in the field, will collect series of advices on what should be established as a regular policies to prevent some segments of pupils being totally disconnected from the educational process. So this will happen. But the data are usually of quality we academic researchers can reliably use.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but the positive change is using the technology in education, which is probably on the increase. And this could actually relate to the skill sets that are being needed in the future, right? So maybe the students in the future will be actually better equipped with IT and technology. What do you think?
Hopefully, probably. I can only guess. I don't know. We knew even before the pandemic that in some sense students were smarter than their teachers in using digital devices. So the question is to what extent this helped them even more. We'll see.
So there is plethora of topics to be researched.
Yes, it is.
And students and people in IDEA have a lot of topics to work on in the future, right?
Yes, there are so many topics. So we need more people to research it. And this goes back to what you asked before. We need real demand for public institutions, from grant agencies and from the ministries, and even from the European Union to help individual countries to develop more research in these areas. Because without that, we cannot rely merely on the private sector, which has partial interest in this area, and we cannot do real research without public support.
Yeah, it needs to be systematic. Okay, thank you very much for your words, and see you later.
Thank you for inviting me.